It was early morning in Ouagadougou. The city was still awakening under a thin mist, while the first rays of sun struggled to pierce the overcast sky. In the presidential palace, the silence was thick, as if it sensed something extraordinary about to unfold. Ibrahim Traoré, dressed in a simple uniform without visible insignia, walked quietly through the inner courtyard. There was a restlessness in the president's eyes, a deep pain that didn't stem from politics, but from a recurring nightmare that had haunted him for weeks. The face of a dust-covered child, crying in the desert, calling for someone who would never come. He didn't know her name, he didn't know the place, but he felt she was real. A counselor rushed in with an unusual expression. He held a tablet streaming live footage from Burkina Faso's northern border, where a humanitarian convoy had just received dozens of Syrian refugees who had managed to cross the desert fleeing war. At the center of the images was a Syrian girl, about 7 years old, dressed in rags, clutching a doll made of scraps and a crumpled piece of paper pinned to her chest. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She only looked silently at each soldier, as if searching for something lost. Traoré stopped, unblinking. That was the child from his dream. The same gaze, the same deafening silence. He didn't hesitate. He cancelled all his meetings for the day and ordered the presidential helicopter to be prepared. None of his aides understood, but those who knew him knew. When Ibrahim acted from the heart, no force on earth could make him back down. Aboard the helicopter, the sound of the wind mingled with the president's absolute silence. His gaze was fixed on the horizon. When he landed at the refugee camp, dozens of children ran toward him, but he didn't smile. He walked straight ahead, guided by a force that seemed ancestral, until he stopped in front of the girl. She didn't move. She only raised the paper pinned to her chest and handed it to him. It was a letter. Written in trembling Arabic, it read, "If someone finds my daughter, take care of her. My name is Aisha. I didn't survive, but my daughter is innocent. Her name is Noor. She carries the light of my people. She is the last flame of our lineage. May God place a true man in her path, someone who still knows compassion." Traoré read in silence. Then he knelt before the girl, placed his hand on her head, and closed his eyes. For a moment every soldier fell silent. It was as if time had stopped, and there, without a word, he lifted her into his arms as if she were his own daughter. The world's cameras captured that moment. The image of an African president, in the middle of a refugee camp kneeling before a Syrian orphan, spread across news outlets from Tokyo to New York in less than 20 minutes. But Traoré wasn't concerned with headlines. He was concerned with what that girl carried, a silent trauma, a frozen fear, and a future that could still be saved. Upon returning with her to the palace, many questioned his decision. Advisors warned him about political implications, national security, and even potential media manipulations. But Ibrahim was clear. He said only, "If a man is afraid to love a child because it might cost him votes, he doesn't deserve to be where he is. I didn't enter this war to be president. I entered to be human." In the days that followed, Noor began to speak. In a heavy Syrian dialect, she described in fragments the night her village was attacked. Her father disappeared. Her mother hid her under a tent and said, "Stay silent, my light. The world will see you, but first it must hear you in silence." That phrase echoed powerfully in Traoré. The world will see you, but first it must hear you in silence. He began spending hours with her. He left ministers waiting. He cancelled entire committees. Every day at the end of the afternoon, he sat with Noor in the palace garden. There she drew, told stories of her people, and smiled little by little. She didn't call Traoré father, but she looked at him as if he were the only adult in the world who saw her not as a problem, but as a promise. One night, when Burkina Faso was hosting an international UN delegation, Noor quietly slipped out of the residential wing and entered the ceremonial hall. Traoré was standing, surrounded by world leaders, and everyone fell silent as she crossed the red carpet with her rag doll in hand. She stopped in front of him, looked into his eyes, and in hesitant French said, "Merci, Baba." The word Baba means daddy. There was an awkward silence, then timid applause. But no one understood the impact it had on Traoré. His face tightened. He knelt right there, embraced the girl, and cried. For the first unsubscribe since he took power, he cried in public, not out of weakness, but because before the world he was no longer just the commander of a nation at war. He was the father of a promise. The scene was televised. It went viral. It was translated into over 50 languages. And while governments debated refugee quotas and security measures, a man in the heart of Africa had proven, with one gesture, that politics can wait when humanity knocks at the door. That story, however, was far from over, because Traoré's gesture didn't just move the world. It sparked an uprising. Thousands of refugee families began writing letters to Burkina Faso's presidency, not asking for food, not asking for money, asking for just one thing: listen to our children. Traoré called a press conference and announced something no one expected. From this day forward, any war-orphaned child who crosses our borders will be considered a daughter of this homeland. Noor was the first, but she won't be the last. At that moment, the camera zoomed in on his face. He was holding Noor's hand. She squeezed it tightly. And there, in that simple gesture, a new African story began to be written. Traoré knew that decision would have consequences. Reports started coming in. Some neighboring countries criticized the measure, citing risks of regional instability. Geopolitical experts called it dangerous populism, but the people reacted differently. The next morning, hundreds of African women gathered in front of the presidential palace, not with protest signs, but with pots, fruits, toys, and children's clothes. They said only, "If this girl is the daughter of our president, then she is our granddaughter, and a granddaughter doesn't go hungry here." It was the first time since the start of the war in the Sahel that Burkina Faso experienced a morning of peace without gunfire in the north or fear in the south. It was as if, for a brief moment, tenderness had disarmed violence. Noor became a symbol, not a trophy, but a living seed of something that could still grow, even amid ruins. Western media tried to frame the case as a publicity stunt. A French journalist asked Traoré, "Aren't you afraid this will be seen as political theater?" His response was simple: "If this is theater, then I hope the world watches, because it's time to stage something more beautiful than bombs and treaties. It's time to stage love." In private, however, Traoré faced another challenge. Noor began showing signs of deeper trauma. At night, she screamed in her sleep. She didn't recognize her name when called abruptly. She drew images of hooded men, fire, and a house without a roof. Traoré decided to bring her to his meetings, even the most tense ones. He wanted her to know that power didn't mean fear. He sat her beside him, let her color silently while he discussed budgets, war, agreements. The scene became common: suited ministers, maps on the table, and a girl with colored pencils drawing rainbows in the corner. Once, while discussing a new offensive against armed groups in the north, Noor raised her hand. Everyone laughed, not believing she would speak. But she did. She said, "If they burn everything because they're angry, are they scared too?" Traoré didn't respond, but his expression changed. He ended the meeting and left in silence. That night, he rewrote the speech he would give at the UN the following week. In the UN General Assembly Hall, with all eyes on him, Ibrahim Traoré began his speech not with data or diplomatic appeals, but with the girl's words: "If they burn everything because they're angry, are they scared too?" He then told Noor's story, showed a photo of her with her rag doll, and said, "The war we fight out there began first inside someone who wasn't heard as a child. All the world's conflicts are just echoes of tears that were never wiped away." He received a standing ovation. For the first time, delegations that never agreed stood together. Upon returning to Burkina Faso, Traoré found something unexpected. The people had erected a small statue in a public square, not of him, but of Noor, holding hands with other children, smiling. It was made of clay, mud, and scrap metal, materials collected by street children. Below it, a phrase: "She is not just Aisha's daughter, she is the daughter of us all." Noor started going to school, with discreet bodyguards, true, but she began living as a child. She learned quickly, spoke Arabic, French, and began picking up Moori. She always carried her doll tied to her waist, and every Friday before sunset she asked Traoré to take her to the top of the hill where the old military observation tower stood. There she stood in silence, looking at the horizon. One day she said, "I saw Mommy in that sky." She smiled. Traoré didn't respond, he just held her hand. But the world, as always, didn't rest. News that other children were being welcomed sparked tension. An armed group released a video threatening to kidnap Noor. They called her a symbol of Western weakness. Palace security was reinforced. Many wanted to hide her, keep her out of public view. But Traoré refused. In a historic press conference, he appeared holding her hand and said, "Whoever threatens a child threatens every child of the earth. If a man hides the light for fear of darkness, he's already lost the war before fighting. Noor will not hide, because she's already lived hidden too long." The response was devastating. In less than a week, civilians formed protection networks around schools. Mothers began accompanying military convoys with baskets of food. Men put down weapons to teach planting. It was as if, for the first time, the war no longer had just enemies. It had a child, Noor. And what happened next was even more extraordinary. One of the rebel leaders, known only as Bakr, sent a handwritten letter to the presidential office. Inside was an old photo. It was him, still young, with a daughter in his arms. On the back of the photo, he wrote, "I lost my daughter to war. I don't want any other man to lose his. I'm willing to talk. For her." Traoré responded with another letter. Inside, a photo of Noor smiling in the garden, and a phrase, "There is still time." The meeting happened in secret, in a remote village. Two men who, in any other scenario, would be enemies, but there they were, united by an absence. And when Bakr saw Noor from afar, tears streamed down his face. She didn't understand, she just waved. On the way back, Traoré carried a new agreement in his hands. It wasn't lasting peace, but it was a start. A humanitarian corridor, a ceasefire in some regions, a silent pact, all because of an orphan. Days later, Noor drew something and gave it to the president. It was an empty field with a tree in the center. Under the tree, a girl and a man sitting. She wrote in big letters, "This is the place where the world changes." Traoré had the drawing enlarged and placed at the palace entrance. Every visitor saw it. No one understood it immediately. But it was enough to see the girl running through the corridors, doll at her waist and hope in her eyes, to understand everything. Africa had found more than a symbol. It had found a new future. And in the final speech of that year, before heads of state, civilians and soldiers, Ibrahim Traoré ended with a single sentence pointing to Noor, seated in the front row with her feet swinging on the high bench. Sometimes, the most powerful weapon a leader can wield is a lap. And in that moment, the world didn't see a president. It saw a father, it saw a people, it saw a promise. Because when a child is embraced, war loses its throne, and humanity begins to breathe again.